Hi, it's William from Boxer 2 Valve, and we're starting a whole new series of videos with this episode right now, and I'll tell you a little bit about what is going on. This is a 1985 monolever R80 RT. We just completed the conversion into an S. We put an S fairing on it, repainted it, and so it looks great, but now we're going to make the mechanicals to match. And we're going to pretty much start from the rear and move forward. And it's amazing how much you can actually do with the engine in the frame. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Take basically the swing arm and final drive off. We're going to remove the gearbox. We're going to be changing the clutch, the rear main seal. We're going to be doing work to the front end, to the cylinders, pretty much everything. So let's get started. And what we need to do first is just quite a lot of disassembly needs to happen, just so we can actually get to the various components that we need to work on. And so what I'm going to start with is taking the exhaust off. Get those pipes out of the way. These pipes are pretty shot. This, if you can see here, this rust, it's rusted through here. It's about to rust through here. You can see the way this is bulging right here. And that's indicative of rust about to poke through the chrome. So normally the bolts in here holding the muffler on are M8 Allen bolts, but somebody's put some hex bolts in there. No worries. There, sometimes it can be a little bit tough to get these off. There's a gasket inside here, and they get a little bit tight sometimes. You just have to twist it, but you can see this thing's just totally trash. I'm gonna have to replace the pipes on this bike. That was kind of the plan all along. So you can actually leave the bolts in. You don't have to remove them because these are slotted on these monolevers, so you can just really, like, when you install it, twist it like that, put it on. This one's not as bad, but it still probably won't be long before it looks like that other one. It started to bulge in here, but it's a decent pipe. Okay, now that with the mufflers out of the way, I'm not going to continue with the exhaust right now because it's going to be a lot easier to remove this collector with the rear wheel off. And so now having to look a little bit ahead in the whole scope of the project, we're going to be taking the swing arm out. We're going to be taking the gearbox out. So we need to disconnect the drive shaft. Also, we're going to be working on this final drive because what we noticed right away when I first bought this bike is that it has a little bit of play in the rear wheel bearing. The play, I can actually see the movement and I can feel it. So hopefully we can fix that. We won't know till we take it apart. But before we take the wheel off, the first thing you always want to do is disconnect the drive shaft bolts, because whenever you're doing multiple things, that's definitely step one, because you can use the brake to hold the rear wheel while you loosen those bolts because they're pretty tight. I'm just going to take the clamp off here. The bolts appear to be something special, but they're really not. You just need the box end of a 10mm wrench. It helps if you have something that isn't too thick in this area, but just it hooks right onto the bolt. So even though I'm not going to take the bolts out right now, it's just a great idea to loosen them, at least loosen them. So just rotate the drive shaft out to where you can get to the next bolt. hold the brake down. Just loosen them all. Okay, all 4 bolts are loose. And if you forget that step, then you'll be bummed because you have to put things back together again. So now we can go ahead and take the rear wheel off. And here again, the brake comes in handy for loosening these rear wheel bolts. You could put it in gear too, but I prefer to use the brake. Now, if you have a friend nearby, they can hold the rear brake down for you because it's hard to be on both sides of the bike at once. But what I do too, just as almost quicker than go and summoning someone, is I'll just hook a strap up to the rear brake, to my lift like that, and now I can go ahead and loosen these bolts. There we go. Then loosen the brake rod, or in fact just take the wing nut off altogether. And the rear wheel comes off. So if you watched the other series prior to this one, we did replace the rear wheel because the original wheel was really shot, had been worn beyond spec. So I got a good used, almost new rear wheel for it. That's what I just took off right now. And we're going to be replacing the brake pads. We're going to be going through the final drive. It's very easy to remove the brake pads. On this model, there's a E-clip here. And if you just pull the brake shoes off, you'll probably bend that. So what's a good idea is just take this clip off. Oops. This guy right here. And now, with that off, you can just pull the shoes off like that. Super simple. And actually, that's how they go back on again too later. You just get your springs all hooked up, and then just basically push it on like that. And then you would put the clip back on. That's how that's done. But we're just taking them off right now and set them aside. This is a little rubber damper that was introduced sometime around, I think, 87, and retrofitted to the earlier models because these brakes used to squeak a lot. And so that was the fix. There was like a service bulletin on that, and you'll usually see that on a monolever. It's basically, I think, a silicone rubber thing that just goes on that rear brake spring. And if you have a brake squeal, probably don't have one of those, that might be a really easy fix to your brake squeal problem that's been driving you crazy. I'll put the clip back on so I don't lose it. There we go. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the side panels at this point, just so that I can put them in a safe place. They just clip on, and a screw holds them on the bottom. Very simple. Since it has to come out anyway, I'm going to go keep moving here and take that battery out of there. It's going to make everything that we do a little bit easier to access with the battery gone, and since it has to come out anyway, what the heck, let's get that done. There's the disconnecting the negative battery. You see how I modified the connector here so it just slips over the bolt, and that way it just requires a small quarter turn to make a connection and a quarter turn to be removed. So it's a very simple thing to do. I'll take the positive off now. And there's the battery hold down assembly. You just leave everything just loose on there and it comes out like in one piece, like so. And then to remove the battery, this is one of the batteries that we sell, and it comes with this really cool little carrying handle. So it makes it a snap. You just literally snap this in to the battery. This makes it very easy to pull the battery out. It's pretty neat, and invention. Okay, next I'm going to take the battery tray out. It's a little bit of a tight fit in here with this Airbox, but if you just remove all the hardware, you can lift the battery tray up and it'll snap out like that, and just remove the parts. And out that comes too. This I'm going to go ahead and repaint. It's a little bit rusty. Okay, back into the grimy stuff again. Next thing I'm going to do is take the swing arm off. So just in preparation for doing so, I'm going to go ahead and loosen a bunch of the fasteners that need to come apart, starting with the swing arm pivots. So this cap just pops off. And now this takes a 27 millimeter socket, and on the earlier models, we're talking /5, /6, the opening was very, very narrow in here. And even through the R80G/S, I believe, you need to have a very thin wall 27 millimeter socket. So what we do here is we start with a very good quality Hazet socket that's made in Germany of the finest steel, and then we cut these down on our lathe here in-house so they fit perfectly in those older models. Also, of course, will fit on this mono lever. But you don't really need the cut down version. You can also get by with a standard 27 millimeter socket. This is the one that we sell. It's a little bit cheaper than the one that we have to hand cut, but it fits also perfectly on these mono levers. So if you just have a newer bike, you'll be fine with this one. If you have a newer bike and an older one, or you plan on getting an older bike, then you should get the cut down, or you'll have to figure out a way to do this yourself. And so this is available on our website. We cut it down here, and that's how we supply the socket. So if you need one, we've got it. Just loosening the lock nut. That's it for right now. Need to get inside here with an 8 millimeter Allen, and then you can break that loose. All right, that's loose. This, by the way, is a YSS shock absorber, which is something that we carry. We have a couple different versions of those. You'll find that on our website too. There's a really nice shock absorber. They work very, very well. Okay, so now we're happy that we loosened those drive shaft bolts before. And also with the battery and the battery tray out, it's a whole heck of a lot easier to get to those bolts. So we go ahead and remove them now. Fairly tedious, but doable. The last one's always the one that's the hardest because the flange starts to separate, but I got it out. All right, so that's that. Now these bolts always should be replaced. I just feel that that's the case, so I'm not even gonna save these. I'm going to put them straight in the trash bin right now. So at this point, we could take the swing arm off completely together with the final drive, but since we're going to be working on the final drive, I'm going to just go ahead and separate it from the swing arm right now while it's still attached to the bike. It's a little easier to deal with. Now here again, it looks like these bolts are something special, and they are really a 12 millimeter. And so I've got this box wrench, and I just had to grind a little bit off the edge to make it a little bit thinner in here so that it fits, because it's a really tight clearance. So if you have a box wrench that you want to just modify a little bit, you might need to do that. You may have one that's thin enough, but it has to slip in between the, there's a weld bead there, and it's a really tight spot. So all you need to really do is loosen all these. And they'll come off by hand. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, we already drained the fluids out of this motorcycle quite some months ago. If you want to see how that's all done, go back to the episode number 1 for that. We did that operating temperatures. The first thing we did was drain all the fluids. Okay, so I've got the all 4 nuts off of there. Everything's loose. And now we should just be able to rock that out. Take this upper bolt out. And the final drive should just separate. Like so. There we go. Take the shock off. There we go. I'm going to throw that on the bench. We're going to get into this in a bit. Okay, the next thing is going to be to take the swing arm off. And before I do that, I'm going to take this brake pivot off for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to be a lot easier to get the swing arm out without a bunch of struggling. And also, I want to get that all apart and clean it and lubricate it anyway. So it's just a good time to do all these little things. So to do that, we just have to unscrew that bolt. There's a nut on the inboard side. There we go. This is the part that we're going to want to clean up and lube. Sometimes they're in pretty rough shape, but this one came apart okay. I'll examine it more carefully, but this is where we're going to lubricate, clean all this up before we put it back together again. Okay, now the swing arm can come out. All you need for this is a 6mm Allen. We already loosened the lock nuts. Swing arm pivots unscrew. Once the pivots have been unscrewed completely, sometimes they're still kind of stuck in there, so you support the swing arm and then you can just get a screwdriver underneath the nut and help to pry that out of there if they're stubborn. That's it. There we go. So we'll go ahead and work on this a bit. I'm going to replace the swing arm bearings, and we'll also go ahead and take the drive shaft out, just so you can see how that's done. We'll get back to that in a bit. All right, we might as well get the rest of the exhaust off of here, and so you need one of these exhaust star nut wrenches. Maybe not this exact one. There's other versions of the same kind of tool, but that'll fit right on like so. And then these are notorious for seizing onto the cylinder head, so you want to be very careful not to force it if it doesn't come loose right away. So let's see what happens. Just got a dead blow mallet. Hold that on tight like so. Now, luckily, I can unscrew that by hand, which is good news. Looks like somebody's been in there putting anti-seize on there. Beautiful. Threads are in perfect condition. Looks great. Okay, we can go ahead and leave the nuts on. Just loosely. Let's hope we're just as lucky on the other side. Great. This one's fine too. Okay, we got really lucky on these exhaust nuts. They both came off easily. I think this fact that there was some anti-seize on there meant that there was some preventative maintenance done, and that's great. If that had not been the case, then rather than force the nut off, which invariably leads to disaster, you would want to cut between a couple of these fins here with a rotary tool, with a cutoff wheel, something like that, get in there, and then split the nut apart and bend it out so you could remove it. And if the threads are then damaged, we have a die that can be used to, so our product that we offer is a die that you could use to fix the threads. And worst case scenario, you would have to send us your heads maybe, or send your head someplace to have the threads replaced on the head if necessary. But they're always lucky when they come off easily. And it's always a good idea to take them off once in a while and put some new anti-seize on there. But we'll talk about a lot of that on reassembly. Now, the rest of the exhaust is going to come off. So I loosen these first because these are a slip fit, and having them loose here at the cylinder head is going to be probably advantageous for getting the rest of this exhaust off. Okay, so next we need to be able to slide this collector out the rear. You can see the advantage that we have with the rear wheel being gone, and just makes it everything easier to deal with. Now the side stand is going to be sort of in my way, so I'm just going to use my strap technique here and get that thing out of the way. And now we'll loosen the clamps here. Now, sometimes these get really stuck and you have to like really beat the parts apart, but let's see what happens here. Looks like we're going to get lucky on this one. That one's loose, coming loose. Just have to move it gently back and forth a little bit. See what's going on over there. Okay, great. Yeah, it's coming off just nicely here. There we go. So this, on the mono lever, there are these little gaskets and they usually go bad. And so you have to scrape them out, and the new one, here, and the new one looks like this. It's a soft, I don't know, looks like graphite sort of impregnated paper that fits in there, but invariably these are squished down like that. So having a tool, this is not a tool we sell, but it's something you can get like anywhere. It's an exhaust pipe expander. This works pretty well. If you could just get that in there and tighten that up, it helps to kind of uniformly open up the opening. Then you can get the gasket in and get it slipped over the header pipe. That's pretty much what has to happen. So this looks like it's in okay shape, just dirty, and we'll see what we do with the exhaust later on when we start putting things back together again. But just wanted to point out those couple details. Now the header pipes can come out. That's not the stock setup with those clamps on there, but it works. There we have it. Header pipes are off too. Get those out of here. All right, wow, what's next? So we're gonna take a moment to remove the fuel tank right now so that stays safe, and also it is in the way of a few things we need to get to. So remove these clips here. Let's connect the fuel hose and the vent hose. All right, I'm going to start by taking off the carburetors, and then we'll keep going with Airbox and take the gearbox out too. So just going to go ahead and loosen these clamps here. The easiest way to do this, I think, is to pull this upper boot down, if you can, first, and then the tube comes off like so. We're going to want to always replace these two unless they're in absolutely perfect shape so you don't get any unwanted air leaks. We can set that aside. And then remove the carburetor. This one has a vacuum hose on there, which it may not have when we put it back together. We'll have to see about that. And then remove the fuel hose. Sometimes the fuel hose can be kind of stuck on there, so you can kind of wrestle with it. But I'm pretty sure, I'm 100% sure I'm going to be changing the fuel hose. So I'm just going to use a razor blade and put a couple slits in the fuel hose with a sharp blade, and then able to basically separate that fuel hose, and it comes off easy that way. And now I'm going to just disconnect the cables here. You can see how you can push that one up, unhook the throttle cable, and then just unscrew it. This is loose because I replaced the throttle cables a couple weeks ago. Never tightened them because I never got to the point of adjusting the carburetors. Now this choke spring is all bent. It's going to get replaced for sure. You can push this up against spring tension to release the cable, or sometimes it's easier just to take the spring out. And since we're going to be changing that out anyway, so now you just go like that. Unscrew the adjuster. There's just enough room for that to unhook, and then you can pull it out of the carburetor. So there we have it. So we're going to be getting onto these later. Right now we're just tearing everything apart. So I just took the other one off the right-hand side, just like I did on the left. Identical. We'll set the carburetors aside for a future video. So like if you were doing a clutch job, you would have to do this work. You could maybe leave the swing arm in place, but it's actually just easier to go ahead and take the swing arm out, I think, because it just makes it easier to access everything. So let's say the goal was to change a rear main seal or replace the clutch. You would basically would have done more or less everything. You need to get the carburetors off. You need to get it down to this level. Another little trick you could do though is you could leave the carburetors attached. If you're not doing carburetors, you can leave the cables attached and just like set the carburetors up onto the cylinder or something like that, little shortcuts like that, no problem. But you'd need to have this apart. And you would need to remove the airbox too. And this airbox is common to all models from really 79, 80-ish. They started with this type of flat air filter all the way to the end. So first step is to unclip. And then you'll want to remove this bolt, which is where the ground cable is attached. It's also the vent bolt for the gearbox. It has a little hole in the middle and a little nose. This has a couple of functions. It is a vent for the transmission, allows air to pass, and also the shape of it holds the speedo cable in place. So to keep in mind that this is a separate part here, this plastic bushing that fits inside there like that. This boot is cracked and loose. You see how it just will slide down on its own weight? That's bad. If it's loose like this or cracked in any way, water will go through this, past this boot into the gearbox and mix with the oil and can lead to gearbox failure prematurely. So always keep this fresh. Change it every once in a while, no matter what. There we go. Goes out like that, and then looks like it needs a new air filter for sure too. And then I like to take these clips completely off and set them aside because it's a drag if you lose one or I don't know, it's better just to get them off of there. Okay, now the lower airbox housing will come off. First thing is to remove these little aluminum sleeves. You can get a screwdriver in there carefully and get them to kind of come out a little ways, like that. And then just remove the sleeve. Take that part out. Then now this air tube is sort of pushed in through a groove there. You want to just collapse it like that. and then remove it. There's a groove in here. There's a corresponding raised portion here. There's these tabs which have a corresponding locating piece that's cast into the housing. Shows how it all goes together. There's this little T-fitting that plugs in there like so. And then we'll just take that sleeve out on the other side and remove this entirely. So look what's inside of here. A nut and a washer laying loose inside the airbox. Whoever was in here before forgot to tighten that bolt. Now this is lucky that these things are still in there because it could have been catastrophic. Just imagine if it had somehow found its way into the air tube. But luckily, gravity did its thing and kept them there. But that's why you always want to double and triple check your work. Whenever you think you've tightened something, just test it one more time. Oh yeah, and this one's loose too. Took nothing to remove that bolt or to loosen it. Oh well, that one's tight, so there was no danger of the gearbox falling off. There we go. That comes out like so. And these are the air tubes. These are the vacuum tubes that went to the carburetor. This had an SLS system, the secondary air system, as it was so called, that's been removed and capped. So that's not the worst thing. Collect all the bits here. Fuel hose. Okay, we're just about ready to take that gearbox out. The upper two bolts are now out because we got the air filter housing out. We still have a bolt down here and one on the other side holding the gearbox in. First thing I'm going to do is remove the clutch cable. What helps here is a kind of a bigger sized screwdriver. Set it right in like that to press against the lever, and then you can then easily unhook the clutch cable. Okay, before taking the gearbox out, you want to take this clutch release arm out first. It's going to be in your way otherwise. So, easy enough to do. There's a bolt that needs to be removed. This is a little bit different on these 5-speeds than it is on the older models. The older models had like a pin with a circlip, whereas this is a bolt. And also the entire release bearing mechanism is different. This is the boot. You just remove that bolt, and then you are going to take this out of the boot. Now, invariably they break, just like that one just did. That's okay, I'm going to replace it anyway. But chances are that when you take one of these apart, that boot's going to tear. It's just, the arm gets, or the lever arm where it connects to the boot is usually sort of bonded together, and the rubber is bad, and so they a lot of times will break. The other thing you can do, if you want to be careful not to break it, is take the clamp off and try to remove it all together, or see what comes off first. And there's a spring in there, make sure you don't lose that. Yeah, there's that boot. It broke. Pretty tight fit onto that lever arm. There's a metal piece in there, and it's a tight fit. There we go, like that. So we'll be changing that out for sure, and cleaning this up, lubricating the pivot, very important. You can push the bushing out. Theoretically, it's all rusty in there, but I'll clean it up and try to get that bushing cleaned up real nice. In worst case, change the bearing out, but that is a thing for later too. Okay, the next thing is going to be to remove the shifter linkage. And there's these little clips here unhook the clip and slide it out of the little hole. Basically goes in the hole and clips around the ball socket. This one's bent, very common that these are bent. Just they're inexpensive, good idea to order a couple new ones. And then this can just be popped right off. Always want to keep a good amount of grease in here. And also there were some seals that were missing here that you ought to install because it helps to keep the grease in and the water out. And it's something that's a good thing to have. So next step is kind of optional. You can probably snake the gearbox out around the shifter mechanism, but it's actually just a bit easier if that thing's not in the way. It's just one more thing in the way and just takes a moment to remove. Plus I want to work on the pivot action there too. And I'm just going to go ahead and take the left foot peg bracket off. Sometimes just spending a couple of minutes taking off something like this can save you grief, and that's what we're all about, saving that. All right, then there's a bolt right here in front of the shifter lever, and it really helps if you have a cut off 6mm Allen. Just a regular Allen, I just cut off about a centimeter or so, and now so that fits beautifully right in there. If you don't do that, the typical Allen wrench is just long enough to where it almost pretty much doesn't fit. Now it's kind of hard to sometimes get enough leverage on that, so then what you can do is just take a box end wrench and slip that over the Allen wrench and then use that as an extension, and that helps you to loosen a fastener such as this. And just don't forget to reattach that ground wire when you go to hook things back up again. A lot of times I'll just leave that bolt there. I'm just doing like a gearbox in and out sort of thing, just as a reminder. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and take it off because we got a lot of stuff going on. So one more bolt on the other side. There we go. Okay, now that gearbox can come out. Okay, all the bolts are out. One last thing I'm going to do is take this clutch release rod out, and the bearing comes out, and then most importantly, actually the rod, because that'll get kind of hung up in you just grab it with some pliers like that and remove it. Because you don't have to do this, but if you don't, this could get a little bit hung up in the input shaft of the gearbox, and you're just fighting one more thing you got to fight. Now it's like super simple. All we got to do is rock the gearbox back and then lay it down carefully like that while you disconnect the two wires from the neutral switch. And then it comes out easy as can be. Okay, we made, I think, pretty good progress today. We've got half the motorcycle disassembled and a whole stack of components that we need to rebuild, repair, clean, whatever. And the next thing we'll do on this is actually keep going, taking apart the clutch, changing out the rear main seal, and we're going to do a lot more work to this bike. But for today, we're going to call it a wrap, and we'll be back hopefully next week, as soon as next week, with another episode. And this is William from Boxer 2 Valve. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, so you'll be alerted. And if this interests you at all, you haven't seen any other episodes, go back and look at some of our other videos from the past. We've got a bunch of stuff there now, and lots more to come. So in the meantime, you can also see the parts that we talked about here on this video. There's links to all of those and on our website. And make sure you visit us at boxer2valve.com. And we'll see you soon. It's William from boxer2valve.com saying, keep the shiny side up.